Welcome everyone to episode 12 of the Genesis Speaks podcast. Today we have a special episode where we have a guest, my dad, Mark Schmidgall. He is a lay minister at the church that we go to, and he is here to talk about kind of a mini-series that I have about the image of God. It'll be 2 episodes focused on this topic. The first one today will be about the sanctity of life, and the next episode will be about gender. So the image of God is a relevant and really widely recognized topic that comes from Genesis 1, so that's why it's an important thing to talk about. The first question that I have for my dad here is how he became interested in the topic, so we can start with that. Over time, how did your understanding and thoughts around this topic develop? Just as you kind of learn more about the issue and I guess learn more about the Bible and Christianity and stuff like that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for letting me join you here.
Yeah.
And I know you've put a lot of work into this series here. I appreciate that. I also appreciate all the listeners, and it's our hope that this is informative to everyone that listens here. And so really maybe the first of all, regarding sanctity of life, I think I'm probably the same as everyone listening here, to where we all, I think, have a very special I think the sanctity of life is special to all of us. And really 2 verses in Genesis chapter 1 where it talks about God creating humans, in verses 26 and 27 where it says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And then God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he man, male and female he created them. So this is so interesting to me, and really to probably all of us, is that humans are the only created beings on this earth who were actually created after the image and the likeness of God. So we actually, every human being, I don't know if it's 6-7 billion by now, whether good or evil, are truly bearing the image and the likeness of God. So that's very special, to think that we all have that value. And really, I think too, ultimately at the end of the day, our value, our self-worth is derived from the fact that we have been created in the image and the likeness of God. And so I would say as well, I've probably become more interested in this over the past several years, where I've just noticed some things happening in society in various arenas, and some of them we'll talk about a bit during this episode. That's just really, it's like there's an attack against humanity. And it's almost, when we talk about the likeness and the image of God, we know that there are very special things such as emotions, loving, and there's a concept called connection, where there's connection one with another. I think we often talk about human connection. And then just the value of our spirit and our soul. So again, I think there's been a number of things as well that have been working pretty strongly against that. And so that's really kind of piqued my interest as well over the past several years.
Yeah. Thanks for that answer there. I think kind of what I envision for the point of this podcast is just to, one, outline, like you were saying, the true and inherent value that every individual has as a human being, and also the spirits at play that are, either trying to attack that and challenge that value, or I guess on the other side it'd be support and acknowledge that value. And we're going to talk about some specific topics here, but all kind of under the umbrella of kind of a culture of life, a spirit that would support that, or a culture of death, the the spirits that would be behind that. So, next question I have is, in what ways do you see Satan working in America, where we live, to attack this value that we all have as being image bearers of God?
Well, I think that probably the main ones are ones we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah.
For sure, pornography. There's no question about that. And in fact, not only is that a strike against the image of God, it's a strike against marriage. It's a strike against God's design for humanity in general. So, of course, pornography, and for sure, abortion, certainly. And we'll talk. There's other things too. We'll talk about slavery a little bit, on just general concepts of human trafficking, the exploitation of children. Talk a little bit or some about fetal cell research, and some other things too. But I think those are at least some very key ways. Probably when you boil it all down, it probably comes down to when Adam and Eve, when they were created, the very first commandment that God gave them was to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth and to also have dominion over the earth. I wonder about this. I wonder if the enemy, when he heard God say that, if he was already in his mind trying to devise a plan to flip that around to where God wants humans, he wants flourishing and reproduction of humans, where the enemy would want to try to, bring the anti-flourishing and the spreading of humanity. And so we'll probably be talking about some of those different things that are really happening probably at more so of a spiritual level. There are powers, demonic powers, and there's angelic powers and so forth. But so anyway, I think just to sum it up, I think the enemy really wants to attack God's design for humanity, because God's design for humanity leads to flourishing spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Yeah. That's right. So, yeah, some of these things, the topics that you brought up, are pretty controversial, and a lot of people pretty emotional topics for a lot of people, and people have experienced things like this directly. So, I know you mentioned before we started that your desire was not to be condemning on any of these issues or necessarily trying to, promote an agenda or force your opinion, but rather you would like to be more informative. So, do you have any comments on that? On what kind of the motivation behind how we're going to be approaching these topics here?
Yeah, no, this is just entirely to be informative. In fact, honestly, just many of us have very valuable input to add to all of these topics here. As you say, they're controversial. They're all a lot of different ways of looking at them. And so all we'll be doing in this discussion is just adding input on these conversations. Hopefully there's some value here to the listeners. Hopefully there's some information that can be gathered. And you're right. This is not like condemning or putting people. It's definitely not that at all.
Yeah, I've mentioned this quote on the show before, but my uncle's is a financial advisor, and his strategy it's to inform people of the options and the consequences of their decisions, not necessarily to tell them what's right or wrong, more so just, lay out the reality of the situation so that they can make an informed decision moving forward. And I kind of like to think of that as being more of a motivation, as opposed to trying to force my beliefs on someone, or say somebody's wrong for not being exactly like me, because
right.
At the end of the day, we're all kind of have equal value in the eyes of God. So there's not one person who's better than the other.
Right. And really too, just the very fact of just different people adding different input to various conversations, that alone shows that we're made in the likeness and image of God, because all of us, we're adding some sort of value to the conversation, but we're looking at it from different perspectives. And I think that's also, we can see that in God as well. we desire to add value. We desire to add meaning into the pool of meaning of the discussion. And that's part of God, adding value, adding meaning. We want to matter. We want our thoughts to matter. That's all part of being after the likeness and image of God. And so, again, all we're doing here is just simply adding to the pool of meaning, if you will. We'll have different perspectives than other people, and that's fine, because that's how God created it. We're not all monolithic. There's a lot of variety. God has created variety in nature, as we know, tremendous variety. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And really the way I like to think about it is more so not attacking the person necessarily, but more so, contending against the lie that's behind all of the suffering, that's actually the cause of the pain, not necessarily the person themselves. So with that, I'd say we could get into the first topic here. We can start with the topic that's typically most associated with the sanctity of life, and that would be abortion. So, there's kind of a few reasons that why people would say that abortions happen, and the ones I have in my notes here would be, one reason would be, out of convenience. Another reason would be out of desperation, or another reason that's brought up a lot of times as well is for medical reasons. So, do you want to address those reasons and how, we can bring the idea of sanctity of life and being valued as an image bearer of God, like how would that relate to these reasons here that people give for having abortions? We can start with convenience first.
Well, I think convenience is probably the easiest issue to address. I don't think there's going to be as many of our listeners that would consider that to be too controversial. I think we all recognize the biblical God's design, which is good for humanity, regarding sexual intimacy is between a husband and a wife who are married, and they're married for life. So when we're engaging in convenience, I think we can all recognize that that's not right. And I think when we kind of think about pro-life, where I think that Christians have a heart is for both the mother and the child within the womb. A lot of times it seems like maybe there's not so much regard for the child within the womb, but really we have the desire as Christians. We see that the prophet Jeremiah, when he was still in the womb, God sanctified him in the womb, and when John the Baptist was in the womb, and when he heard Mary, who was pregnant with Jesus, John the Baptist leaped in the womb. We know in Psalm 139 it talks about God creating us intricately in the womb. And so we have a heart. We know that really upon conception, the DNA that basically codes for all of us is present immediately. It's simply all there. And so again, it's the convenience part. I don't think many of us are going to probably have much of an issue saying that that's just not acceptable at all. And I think just to make too regarding abortion, there's no doubt it's just really hard. I mean, I know that there are people that have been involved in somehow with an abortion. It's very, very painful. It's very painful. And I think that it's important to recognize that we're speaking about the powers that be who are bringing forth this lie that abortion is a good option, and not necessarily the people who have been hurt by abortion in whatever way it looks like.
Yeah. So, the other reason, desperation, is, you think of, situations where somebody would be kind of a situation of desperation where it's like, doesn't really, kind of both options seem bad, can't really maybe provide for the child, but wouldn't be able to provide for it. So that would, it's like, well, is it even right to bring it into existence then? But you think of the way I would like to think of it is, or one way I like to think of it is like, what were the circumstances that led to that situation in the first place, and how could they be preventable? It's like, well, if you consider, the individual in the situation, essentially the pregnant female, there's a lot of lies that would have had to been accepted by the individual and also the people around that individual in that situation. So to me, the real problem here would be is like, all of the lies that would be around this situation that would lead a person to make a decision like this. And for me, like, like you said, valuing the mother as well, to me, like, one way to truly connect and reach with someone is to speak truth into the lies that they believe. And these lies are obviously brought by Satan. But at the end of the day, sadly, the reality is harsh, I would say. It's like, when an abortion happens, a child who bears the image of God and is valued in his sight is killed, and that's not good.
Right. And I sometimes wonder, too, if it would be helpful. I think sometimes it's more so the information that is withheld from the distressed mother. For example, quite honestly, if the mother in a very desperate or if a difficult situation, a painful situation, if she was required or if she was able, if they allowed her to view the ultrasound of the child within the womb, it would probably have a pretty big effect on what she would ultimately choose to do. In rush situations, I think many times that is withheld. Being able to view an ultrasound, it's a pretty rushed process, rushing it through, rather than just really laying out, hey, here are the options, the consequences. Here's here is the development going on within your womb right now. So that's probably something important to consider as well, is things that are actually being withheld from these difficult decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That'd be, part of the lies that Satan would put around tough situations to try to, influence people to make decisions that aren't good.
I mean, it's very personal to me and to Sally. It's your mom. And we've delivered two young boys and they passed away in the womb around 13, 14 weeks. And it was just amazing how developed they were. You could see their fingernails, feet. I mean, you could just tell they were little boys. And that just, when you see that, there's simply it drastically affects how we approach this issue.
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, it's what the commandments in the Bible were written so that, essentially, like you said, guidance so that we could flourish. So, the solution, and really the solution for all situations, is to become more like Christ. And that would be, seeking what the truth is and having a, upward focus on putting away lies, and then also sharing the truth with others. So, to me, it's like the Bible. When it comes to lies, the Bible has the truth that would counteract those lies, and it's our duty as Christians to share that with the world.
Right. And I think they're just even looking at in a general sense as well. When God said for humanity to reproduce, replenish, fill the earth, that's a culture of life. Abortion is a culture of death, because what we're doing is we're actually I mean, obviously we're kind of exterminating our offspring, I mean, in a sense. And so that's just, we can kind of look at it from a very general view as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the more general perspective that like our society as a whole would provide a path and encourage a path that would lead to more death instead of flourishing and reproduction.
And what's very fascinating to me, and I remember it too, and I probably some listeners will. I remember in the 90s when it was President Clinton and Hillary Clinton was the first lady. And again, they were really promoting abortion. But I remember at the time, the proponents of abortion were saying, we just want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. That was their big thing. Hey, we don't want to see much abortion. We're at a point today to where there is a push for it's on-demand abortion, and you don't have to tell anyone. We're way past the point of being rare. We're talking about on-demand. And so we just see, give the enemy a foot in the door. He's not going to be satisfied. When the enemy came in at safe, legal, and rare, that's not where he was going to stay. And he's gone way beyond that now. And so it's harming women. It's putting women in very terrible situations here. It's really sad. I think there's a lot of heartache that a lot of women and mothers have. But again, I think the enemy does not like humans because we bear the image and likeness of God. I just think it's a reality that we face, especially in this situation.
Yeah. And, Satan, he wants to create the most destruction possible, both physically and spiritually. So, when you accept a culture of death like this, to a lot of people, it's a lot of times it's treated as just a political issue, like, having the freedom to choose, or just kind of a, just another freedom that's on the shelf. But like you're saying, the reality of the situation is, there are real victims to accepting this culture of death where, killing a child is an option for pregnancy.
That's right. In fact, even I think a lot of times we see the phrase, my body, my choice. Where I see a flaw there is that it's not the body. There's a body getting killed. The baby's getting killed. I mean, in theory, it's a decision that's being made against another body. But I think, too, another thing before we move to the next section, it just came out. I just saw a headline, too. I think it's the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy. I think it's come to light that this abortion pill, what's called mifepristone, or I kind of forget how it goes, it's just come out that it's got really bad side effects for the women that take that. And I think that's all part of the culture of death. We know that a pill that is designed essentially to, kill the child developing within you, it doesn't surprise us that there can be dangerous effects on the person who's taking it as well. That's just a good example. That's just came up. I just saw the headline today or yesterday. And in fact, so that the HHS, they're actually going to take a really hard look at that particular prescription.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good current event. I think the last thing to touch on real quick, probably don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it before we kind of transition to the next topic. But, a lot of times you hear, for abortions, there's situations that would, threaten the life of the mother. So it's like almost framed as a choice between, is either the child going to live or the mother going to live, or both die. So, what guidance would you give on that the situations that are framed in that way?
Well, yeah, when and if there is a case where it is literally either the mother or the child, there's no question that's a very tough decision to make. I don't know how often that really happens in today's technology and so forth, how often that's really the case. But, I think a person would want to do everything they possibly can to save both lives. That would be probably the top focus in that situation. What can we do to save both lives?
Yeah.
Can it be done?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the other thing. Also, you hear a lot is, like, what about situations of rape or incest?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what was your perspective on those
Yeah.
situations?
Well, I mean, it's terribly traumatic. I mean,
Yeah.
your heart goes out to any woman that would be subjected to something so horrible. And in fact, I mean, that would be, there's an attack on the image of God right there, is rape and incest. I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I think what I would, about the only thing I could think of to say about a woman who'd be in such a trauma is, I don't see how really killing or ending the life of the child developing within you is really going to take away that trauma or that pain. In fact, it might even add to it. It probably will somewhere along the road. It's really tough. I mean, I think that's where a person with that trauma is going to need loving people around them for a long, long time to guide them. Like, what do I do with this pregnancy, or how do I navigate through this this pregnancy, and then the birth, and then the child, and just a lot of things. But there's a lot of people with hearts out there. There's a lot of Christians. There's a lot of organizations that are, I mean, they are really dialed in to these types of situations to help mothers that are in these really sad, painful situations that the mother or the woman did not ask for.
Yeah. And that would be effort to care for both the mother and the child.
Yeah.
I think the closing thought I have on this topic is, a lot of times, or sometimes, abortion is even portrayed as a compassionate option, especially in situations of, like we were saying, rape or incest or desperation. But I think you said it well, where you mentioned that, having an abortion could actually just add to the trauma and to the hurt and pain, as opposed to alleviate it or take away from it.
I don't see how committing an abortion would take away the trauma of a rape or incest. That's got to be a nightmare that is just, I don't know, counseling. I don't know what you would need to go through. I just don't see how an abortion is going to take that away. And as you said, the concern is that somewhere along the line, the mother or the woman may say, you know what, I did have a child. I could have been a mother. That could come back to haunt them and make the trauma worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the next topic is, it's related. It's more of like an intellectual discussion as opposed to, or academic discussion as opposed to an emotional one, but the topic is fetal cell research. So that's a pretty big thing in academia today. I don't know, probably not. The extent that it's used probably isn't reported as it should be, but essentially what we're talking about here is the use of cells from a fetus that was aborted for the purpose of scientific research. So I know you've done some research on this topic previously, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. So what would be your kind of opening thoughts on this topic here?
So for quite a while, when I was first kind of hearing or reading about this whole concept of fetal cell research and so forth, I was kind of along the lines of, well, wait, the baby's been aborted. I mean, it's obviously bad, but if their corpses can be used for something good, why is it that big of an issue? That's kind of what I thought. And when I started doing research, I found that was not honestly. So what I found was So when we talk about fetal cell research, what has to happen, you are harvesting the organs of the babies. However, in order to produce viable organs for useful cell lines, the actual harvesting of the organs need to be pre-planned and precise. And so maybe just to give an example here, I just have a few. I have done quite a bit of research on it. I do have a research paper here, but just for an example here, in 2020, again, we keep talking about Robert F. Kennedy. He conducted a video interviewer with a doctor who was with an institute called Sound Choice Pharmaceutical Institute, and she has, what she found was in the first 15 minutes of the interview, her name is Dr. Teresa Deischer. She has over 30 years of pharmaceutical research and leadership experience, but she makes it quite clear that infants in the womb are taken out alive with their blood supply functioning and then killed by cutting out their hearts or their brains. This is what is done in order to obtain tissue that will be turned into fetal cell lines. There's an acclaimed doctor. His name is Ian Donald. He's the pioneer of the ultrasound scanner. He has witnessed the WI-38. That's a common cell line used in a vaccine, but it says he has witnessed dissections, and what he wrote, his eyewitness, was experiments were being performed on near-term, alive, aborted babies who were not even afforded the mercy of anesthetic as they writhed and cried in agony, and when their usefulness had expired, they were executed and discarded. So the real challenge here is that in order to harvest a viable organ, and maybe just one more quote here, and then I'll kind of let you talk. There's a very common cell line called the HEK-293. It stands for human embryonic kidney. It's pretty commonly used in pharmaceutical and biomedical research, but they're able to track where that cell line came from. It actually came from basically they were kidneys cut from a living infant in the Netherlands in the early 70s who had been removed live from her mother's womb. And then it was her removal and then removing her kidney is what actually killed her. And they've been able to kind of keep harvesting and reproducing the cell line ever since. So basically, I guess to sum this up is it's not just a passive thing where it's very planned. In other words, if you need to have a good, strong, hardy, solid organ that's just right in order to be able to develop a hardy cell line that's going to be useful for whatever it is. So it's very planned. And I think HEK-293 was a kidney, but I think they estimated it was around probably 100 attempts on other babies until they finally got a kidney that was just right for the job.
Yeah. And, people will say it's like, well, if they're going to be aborted anyway, you might as well use that for something good. But I guess where my mind goes is, is there any reason that would, justify killing a person? Even if you claim, good would come out of it, it's like, I don't know if that's worth, whatever, quote, good. I don't know if that's worth the price of the blood of the person who was killed.
Right. And I think just to kind of put this in a very positive and inspiring viewpoint, I think this is where Christians, I think there's a really big opportunity. I think there is a little bit of an awakening. And what they're finding is there are alternative ways to do very, very good research without even using fetal cells. There's very good, in fact, I think you can actually use some adult, fully developed, I think, some cells that does not require death. In other words, I think there's a lot of opportunity to do very, very, very good research and not even needing to you don't even need to harvest organs from living from babies. And so I think that would probably be the best light to put on this here is just Christians or whoever it is just engaging and finding. In fact, and we do that. We do that in, I think, whether it be in more and more in agriculture now and so on and so forth. We're looking for more friendly ways to produce and to consume, and we're looking for safer alternatives and just a number of things and a number of different things. And I think we can do the same thing certainly in pharmaceutical and biomedical research. I've heard that adult stem cells work perfectly fine, and you can get those without harming or killing anyone. So I think that'd probably be the way I would sum it up here is let's look for alternative ways that we don't even need to go down this pathway here and when conducting research.
Yeah. To me, what the situation is the reason why they use human cells is because essentially of the quality of the data that comes from the studies that use these cells. So it's like, if you want to study how a human reacts to something, well, the best thing to use for a accurate reaction is a human, essentially.
Right.
But yeah, I wouldn't say that is, well, to me that would come more from, the spirit that's behind the culture of death instead of life, to like use humans as experiments in order to gain data so that, you could benefit other people. There's been other examples of this in history. Some of the more well-known ones are like the Tuskegee experiment, where they infected people with syphilis, I believe, to see how they responded. It was, sadly, black people in the South that were experimented on because of, the belief that they were lesser individuals because of their skin color. And then also there was, the experiments in the Nazi concentration camps, and then also the Japanese did experiments on their prisoners of war. So it's like, yes, it is true that like when you want to see how a human reacts to something, you test something on a human, but it's like I don't really think that's the ethical way to do it though. And it's, like you said, the more positive way to approach something like this is to seek the best alternative.
Yeah, I agree. And another problem is, as this spreads, we've been talking about it's being used in maybe pharmaceutical and biomedical research. They're even using fetal cells. And even the term fetal is, it's a baby. And that's another thing. I think the enemy says fetus instead of baby to kind of cover it. But also it's very lucrative. And it's also they're also using fetal stem cells in artificial sweeteners, flavorings, and cosmetics. So it keeps expanding, and I think it is pretty lucrative. But as you say, it's not taking into account very ethical considerations. There have got to be ethical considerations based upon the sanctity of life, which is based upon the reason there's sanctity of life is because we're made in the likeness and image of God. So children, whenever a person at the point of conception, all the information required to make that person is present. It's in our DNA. We're just at different levels of that DNA being fully coded. So anyway, I think you're right on. I think there needs to be ethical considerations and what are the best alternatives. And again, I think they are finding that there truly are alternatives. And so hopefully that pathway can continue. I think maybe as more people become just aware of this, hopefully that it inspires a number of people just to look for ethical alternatives.
Yeah. And, if there isn't any, if there isn't any kind of barrier or restriction placed on this kind of research, or if there's nobody that speaks up about it, I mean, it'll just continue to grow. And essentially my point is, it's like the more demand there is, it's like, well, the more that, providers are going to look to supply that demand.
Right.
And, it's just, you maybe try to justify it or isolate the situations, but it's like, at the end of the day, if our products that we consume are coming at, the price of blood, it's like, yeah, that seems like that's fruit that comes from, the culture of death as opposed to the culture of life. So, um, yeah, I think like
Yeah.
advocating for alternatives would be the
Right.
way to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it is pretty chilling. I mean, there are a number of chilling things they found. They've done the undercover footage in Planned Parenthood places where they are selling baby body parts. And so, anyway, you're right. It's a culture of death. And so I think the key is for the Christian, what are the ethical alternatives based upon our knowledge of the sanctity of life?
Yeah. So, this is a tough question. It's like, is it ethical to use products that come from this research or use data that comes from this research? And, I don't really know if I know the answer to that
Sure.
necessarily. I mean, it's
Right.
like almost
Right.
hesitated even asking the question.
Right.
But maybe
Yeah.
my thought would be, it's like, each decision that we make either tilts the universe towards good or tilts it towards bad. So it's like, when you make decisions, which spirit are you looking to support? Sometimes it may seem like there's not an option, or alternatives don't really exist. But in general, I think our end goal should be a trend towards the culture of life, as opposed to, just accepting the
Sure.
progression of the culture
Sure.
of death.
Yeah.
And like, however that's, approached, or it might not necessarily be like analyzing every single individual decision, but more so just shifting the culture away from the trajectory of death.
Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it generally. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of
Yeah.
different specific discussions around that, a lot of
Right.
different perspectives and so forth. But I think it would be the ideal situation is, can we find an alternative that's ethical?
Right.
And it would be great. I mean, I think we would be thrilled if we found a manufacturer or a research organization that was really trying to bring forth alternatives, ethical alternatives. I think we would be thrilled to be able to support them. There may be more cost because I think that, there might be some more cost. There may be some things, so forth, but probably, can we at least start considering, hey, are there alternatives here? Is that feasible in this situation? It might not be, it probably won't be feasible in all situations, to be honest.
Yeah.
But at least just to be aware of it and just to at least start thinking about it, or at least maybe asking the question, or just small steps like that.
Yeah. And one thought that I have just in general, it could be applicable to multiple things that we talk about, but I maybe kind of touching on it already. But if you look at, why, the reasons behind, why somebody makes a decision that they do, just in general, if it appears to be, whether good or bad, it's like, well, you have to consider essentially like the context or the things that led up to that decision. So it's like that one decision, well, it's impacted by that person's experiences in the past. It's impacted by decisions of other people. And so they like to, criticize one person for one decision. Well, it's like there's actually a whole lot more that goes behind it. And it's like, if you trace back every bad decision, you end up in the Garden of Eden. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
the way I interpret that is, what Satan tries to do is influence people to make bad decisions, and those bad decisions will have consequences that negatively impact other people. So, like, the more bad decisions that people make, it's like the more harmful consequences there are for the people around them. So he wants to create environments and situations where, like, a bad decision is seems like the only way to go, or
Mm-hmm.
it's the way of least resistance, or there's no alternative. So Satan's goal is to create a situation like that, where it's like, in theory, yes, that person is responsible for that decision, and it's still wrong, but you also have to understand that there's so much going on behind the scenes of a person making that decision. So, and that's part of the problem as well.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point.
Yeah. So it's
Good
like,
consideration.
you could say, oh, it's wrong to buy a food that used fetal cell research, but it's like, well, maybe we should start promoting alternative forms of
Sure.
research. So,
Mm-hmm.
that situation or that decision that, doesn't need to exist.
And probably, and that's where it kind of can lead to when a person can start developing conviction that, hey, you know what? Really, we should be finding alternative ethical methods. And so conviction is a very powerful force that is actually part of the likeness of God is conviction. And so it may inspire or convict some people to really try to find very good alternatives. And that would be great. There's no question about it. That would just be that would be great.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say about that before we move on? Or I think we covered it
I
pretty
think
well.
at a
Yeah.
very general level, we covered it.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
there's so many specific points around this that it would, but at a very high level, I think we've covered it well enough for this podcast.
Yeah. So the next topic is related in a way when it comes to products that come from unethical circumstances. So, the issue is slavery. Obviously, like as Americans, when you think about slavery, it happened in the South a long time ago, but actually, where we're at today is there's more slaves worldwide than there has ever been before. That's mostly because of there are also more people worldwide than there's ever been before. But I think what that highlights is that the issue of slavery, globally speaking, hasn't really gone away, and it plays a pretty significant part in commerce and trade and industry. Even though it's uh, kind of behind the curtain, so to speak. So, yeah, I don't know if it's easier to talk about slavery as more of a general level, but really, if you start to look into it, there's so many different products, or a lot of it's you know, raw materials that come from unethical labor practices that it's kind of astounding. Really, it's like, yeah, there's quite a bit. Some of the examples I had just prepared for this episode, and there's some examples in the sources, but there's slavery in the industries of fishing, textiles, sugar, cocoa, minerals, and electronics. Yeah, a lot of this happens in either Africa or Southeast Asia, but Africa has a lot of natural resources, but unfortunately, they are not harvested in ethical manners. And then electronics is what use a lot of these minerals, and it just the supply chain, is not exactly clean. So yeah, there's so many different things, specifics to get into, but really, what the issue is, it's exploiting. Well, it's exploiting humans, using their skills and abilities, but not properly rewarding them for it. And a lot of times, like slavery can be used more broadly, like maybe they are paid, but not enough, and or the working conditions are very poor. Um, so yeah, it's a issue of exploitation of humans. So we would see this also as an attack on the image of God. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this issue of slavery that's, maybe not widely reported, but something that's very real.
So it seems like in these instances here, this would be where, maybe to tie this into how it's an attack on the image of God, it's where the output or the profit that a person can take is valued rather than the person being valued for who they are. That's probably the core of slavery and exploitation in this instance. So this is tough. I mean, because there's a lot of products that we use that at some level in the supply chain, there probably were slaves working on them. I do think that there are, especially like in cocoa or cacao technically, and coffee beans, I think there are very slowly but surely, even in these arenas, there are some considerations of maybe this isn't ethical. And so I think that there actually are some companies and that are trying to produce or supply some of these in an ethical manner. So it might be along the same lines that we talked about with, research. Are there some sources we can find that are more ethical? Now, again, it's tough because there's, textiles and clothing. I mean, there's many things that we use that have come probably from slave labor. But again, a journey starts with just very small steps. Just ask the question, is there another place? Can I source this chocolate, this coffee, this tea, this whatever it is, this food product, maybe even this product, can it be sourced from some place that actually considered some of the ethical aspects of humanity?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Part of the problem is, slavery, it makes products cheaper, if the labor costs are low. So, to a lot of times, like, choosing a more ethical source would be choosing a more expensive option. And to
Right.
me, this is just an example of, Satan trying to create a situation where, continuing the culture of death seems like the easiest thing to do. Or it's almost
Right.
more of the like default decision, or kind of just the way it is.
Yeah, basically it's just simply normalized.
Right.
Very normalized.
Yeah. I was watching a video on YouTube one time, and it was talking about the element tantalum. And tantalum is essential for different electronics that we use. And I think it was mined in Africa, but yeah, and people, the mining conditions were not good, and people would either be injured or die in these mines. And my thought was, it's like, I don't even know what tantalum is, but it's essential for the products that I use, and people are dying to get it. And it's like, I didn't even know this existed, but yet there's still a human cost to this thing that I didn't even know existed. So I was like, hey, it's just this topic is so far reaching. It's how do you even approach it?
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think I like how you put it. At the end of the day, what it is, it's either a lot of times it's corporations putting the value of the profit or the product over the value of the human.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a company, they don't necessarily care if someone dies in the mine. That's expendable. What they care about is what's in the what they're getting out of the mine, and are willing to maybe cross some ethical lines if they're able to get more product, which I'd say is ultimately bad. But it's just slavery has always existed, so it's just something that's always been a challenge for humans on the planet.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's like, is it wrong to get these things? I'd say it's like, yeah, at the end of the day, you're still contributing to a culture of death, but the ideal would be to try to slowly transition or make decisions that would change the trajectory of the culture to more of a culture of life.
Yeah, I would say that makes sense.
The next topic I have on the list here is pornography. So, actually, it's another form of slavery, but it's obviously I don't know, it's such a big issue in our society today, how easily accessible it is and how much supply, how much availability there is, and also how that availability is created. Yeah, and the numbers of percentage of people who either have looked at it or struggle with it are through the roof. Yeah, I tried to find numbers like what are the percentages. It's a little tough to nail it down, but it's like generally speaking, like 16 or 60% of men would struggle with it, and like 40% of women would say, they've dealt with it at some point in their lives, which is a lot of people. So, my belief is that pornography is a form of abuse, and obviously it'd be an attack on the image of God. So, yeah, what thoughts do you have on this issue to start us off here?
Well, it's definitely a very strong attack on the image of God, where you're actually taking a human and you're really turning them into an object or a collection of body parts to be basically lusted after or to fulfill a carnal desire, rather than looking at that person as a soul that's made in the likeness and image of God. And I think that this is almost a case where the enemy is stripping spirit and soul out of everything and just turning us into raw animals, just a raw collection of body parts that serve no purpose other than fulfilling my carnal desire and instant gratification or what have you. It's a very strong strike against what God holds dear. I mean, when he said that men and women were created in the likeness and image of God, and he breathed into him a living soul, a living spirit, and when God created sexual intimacy, there was supposed to be connection and intimacy there. There was many special things around that. This whole concept of pornography is removing everything God had intended. He's removing the spirit and the soul and the heart and everything and just turning it into just a raw, animal-like action, just devoid of anything valuable. And we know what it's leading to. We've already talked about rape and incest. There's all the sexually transmitted diseases and broken homes and on and on and on it goes. And when we're addicted to pornography, we don't feel good. We feel like garbage. We're mastered by it. It's a very strong attack on the image of God.
Yeah, and it's a perversion, like you said, it's a perversion of God's design. And obviously God designed these desires for good, but if you use them in ways that are not designed, there are consequences. And partaking in a sin like this, it has a pretty significant negative impact on the brain and how your brain processes either just viewing people in general, or how you think about either male or female, and also the trauma that it creates for the victims is something that you don't necessarily see on the surface. And one way people talk about it is, some people present pornography as they say it's just a form of free speech, but now I don't agree with that. I think it's a form of abuse, and for the reasons that you just said, it's a grave attack on the image of God and the value of an individual. And it's obviously not something that would come from a culture of life, and certainly does not respect the sanctity of life. And, one, very dark corner of this topic is this sex trafficking of children. And, it happens, well, they say pretty much everywhere at any time. And as far, the amount of children that are impacted in this area is pretty much far greater than we could ever imagine. And one driver of this trafficking and that way that a lot of predators operate is they operate on social media and targeting young children and to exploit them. So yeah, it's just one area of it's a very dark evil that exists in our country today. And yeah, the question is, it's like, well, what are people doing about it?
Right. I suppose that engaging sexual traffic and so forth, that's probably going to have to happen at governmental levels. There's probably a tremendous amount of resources that would need to be put forward to engage with that. And I do know, and I don't know, this is very recent as well. I know that Tim Tebow is engaging Congress right now on something called the Renewed Hope Act, where he really has a heart for dealing with the concept of sexually exploited children. So maybe Congress will get serious and, and begin to deal with this.
Yeah, but to take this at more of a personal level as well, it's like, why do people make the decisions to continue to look at pornography or even go into more of the child pornography? It's, well, lies that they believe that develop over time. So,
Right.
it's pretty much any individual everywhere is at risk of exposure or believing these lies. So, one practical way that anybody could, or something that anybody could do, is just focus or look for look for opportunities in the people around them to address the different lies that they believe and speak truth into them, so that they don't make decisions based off of lies that have significant negative and harmful consequences on the victims of the choices.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the more that we can train our minds to view any human we see as an image bearer of God with a spirit and a soul, and that we want to be a godly influence, that's going to help us make the right decisions and engage the right way when we are engaging others, and for sure will affect what we choose to look at, where we choose to go on the internet or whatever that might be. But for sure, there's definitely lies built in when we are going down that path of pornography addiction.
Yeah.
Probably one very common lie would be, I have the right to do this. We have zero right to look upon any other human being as a collection of body parts rather than a spiritual soul. I mean, there is no right. But that's a pretty common lie that we can very easily tell ourselves.
Yeah. And another concept that applies to this is like, where there's demand, there's supply. So it's like, as as people accept these different lies more and more, there's going to be more of a demand for this sexualized content, and then that would create more supply, and then it's just a circle of increasing supply and demand, and just this increase of sexualized content. Like I said, some people call it freedom, but what it actually is it's enslaving individuals to other individuals' desires. So it's like, the enemy, he promotes it as freedom, but what it actually is it's a form of slavery that it seems, slowly shifting towards over time.
Right. And what's worse is you need more and more of it as time progresses to get the same rush or feel or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely a pathway that is leading away from the sanctity of life.
Right.
And it really even leads against God's design for marriage, because perhaps the most core lie or the biggest lie of all of pornography is that it really tells us that we have the right to get or to receive instant pleasure, instant gratification. And when you take that into a marriage and how it's damaging marriage, you take that into a marriage, this whole concept, hey, I can get instant pleasure, instant gratification. When we're focused on getting rather than giving, that runs the polar opposite of God's design for what love truly is. And love is about giving, not taking. Pornography is all about taking and all about self pleasure, instant gratification, polar opposite with what love, God's love is. And love is what leads to connection, oneness, spiritual health, emotional, physical health. Well, what happens then is that if we are so entrenched into that mindset, and what people are finding, they're finding this, that men, they don't even know almost how to engage in loving, healthy sexual relationships in their marriage. They can't even do it. They literally cannot do it because their minds and their brains have been ruined by pornography, and where it's just all about self. And so we can see, of course, there that that is definitely a method that the enemy is using to attack the God's design, which is an attack against humanity as well.
Yeah. So obviously, this is a big problem that we face today. So, what steps should the church take to address this problem?
Well, probably, I mean, that's a good question. I definitely there'd be a lot of good answers. Probably the very first word that came to my mind is more so awareness. I think the more that it is spoken on is probably going to be helpful, just making people aware, and probably as well trying to make for an environment. Well, I think when we are trapped in that, we do feel very condemned. We feel isolated, very shamed. I mean, we don't like it. There's no man that likes being under the mastery of pornography. No one does. We just don't, and we feel shame. And so probably another thing is just providing avenues or an environment, or what is it, to encourage men who feel trapped to get it into the open, to share with someone else or whatever it might be, but just to encourage openness there. Because as we all know, where the enemy has his power is in secrecy and in isolation. When we keep it inside, that's when the enemy has tremendous power. When we began bringing it to the light, the enemy truly starts losing his grip and losing his power. So I think as well, in addition to awareness, is also providing opportunities and environments, encouragement for men to share with someone. And what that looks like exactly is we don't know, but there's at least a couple things I can think of just right off the bat.
Yeah, those are some good thoughts. And part of the reality is, too, it's like someone who's struggling with this or really anything, it's the reality is they're not really any different than anybody else. It's not like
Right.
somebody has
That's right.
any, like, this struggle is any worse or more shameful than any other,
Correct.
struggle or sin that somebody would go through. So in this regards, when it comes to struggling with sin, I'd say we're all kind of on the same level. And really, yes, you wouldn't need to feel that you're alone and isolated.
And what's interesting about that is when we talk about being similar to other things, remember that I just said that the core lie, perhaps, of pornography is that it's all about self pleasure, self gratification. That's also the core of many other things completely non related to porn, that it's all about self. self-focus and is a core that everyone struggles with in some way. Pornography is just one of them. And so I think that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's just one way I've heard it put before. It's just really just one symptom of a deeper problem.
I'd say that's a good point. It's a symptom. It's not the core root problem. The core root problem, it just has tentacles just all over the place and in so many different areas. And yeah.
Yeah. So, I think we could move on to the next topic now, if you have nothing else to add.
But the only thing I can think of just really quickly, because we do need to move on, but sometimes you kind of hear that, you're a man if you start getting into porn or drinking or stuff like that. Like that's what a man is. We know that the enemy made that up because the greatest irony in that lie is that men are men when they protect the vulnerable. And the biggest lie of all is that when we're engaging in porn, we're harming the vulnerable. One of the biggest lies I've ever heard of is that it's manly to get into porn or even into drinking. As men, we can't protect. I mean, we're actually harming. It's kind of like this. Let's just think, for example, we think, let's say we're a security guard in a museum and we're called to guard valuable artifacts. So we're very careful. We want to protect, we want to guard these valuable artifacts. Let's say all of a sudden we're the museum curator, the security guard, and we just go rogue. We just start smashing all the artifacts. That's what we're doing. When we're men engaging in porn and drinking, we're like the museum security guard smashing all the artifacts we've been called to protect.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's just another example is like as I study looking through Genesis and also other topics too, it's like one of the key tactics of the devil is to just completely reverse and flip the intended purpose of God. So like God intends, for in this example, men to be protectors, but Satan would completely reverse that and through deception and convince them to justify a way to be destroyers, while people would be under the deception of thinking that's like actually a good thing or the true purpose.
Right. Yeah. That's good point.
Yeah. So it's just Satan looks to take the commandment of God and flip it all the way upside down.
Correct.
This interview ended up being 2 hours long, so I decided to split it up into 2 parts. Thank you for listening to the first half.